Great, thank you so much. And so we're pretty honored to be the first on the platform here today. I know you guys just started your course this week, so it's pretty exciting. My name is Amanda Coolidge, and I'm a manager of open education at BC Campus. And I'll pass it to Tracy, just who you are.
Hi, I'm Tracy Kelly, and I'm a manager of professional learning at BC Campus. So Amanda and I work together on this topic as well as others. And just as we're getting going here, I'd like to invite everyone, if you could, just in the chat, quickly tell us where you're from and what is your interest in the topic of open pedagogy.
That's great. While you're doing that, I'll just let you know sort of why we're doing this. Basically, we're doing this because we really want to continue the conversation that's happening around the topic of open pedagogy. We were responding to David Wiley's work and a call to action for more examples of open pedagogy. So he wrote a blog post that you may be reading now in our course called Open Pedagogy, the Importance of Getting in the Air. And that blog post really asked folks in the open community as well as elsewhere to really start advancing and continuing the discussion of open pedagogy and to start helping each other in adopting open approaches. So this was really critical, and we decided that we wanted to continue this conversation and have everyone be a part of it. This is great. Sounds like people are typing in where you're from and what your interest is. That's awesome. Okay. Tracy, do you want me to continue or do you want to just say something about the introductions?
No, go ahead. I'm watching what people are saying.
Great. So as with all of our slides at BC Campus in the Open Education Department, we're just letting you know that this is, these slides are CC BY, so they're available for you to use, modify, distribute, or use any of this presentation with attribution. So we're happy to have you use these slides as needed.
Okay, so interesting. There's quite a range of people, some interested. I'm just kind of looking at where you're from and you're interested in open pedagogy. There's some people looking for examples, which is we are too, and hopefully we can make some together. And some people looking sort of from a research perspective or a practical perspective. So that's great. I think we're going to have a fruitful discussion here today. This is our plan. We're going to talk a little bit about a definition, which is actually, it seems like it's evolving as the weeks kind of pass. In the last couple of months, there's been a lot of activity around this topic and our thinking at BC Campus with our colleagues. We have been playing around with a matrix that we would like to share with you as sort of a thinking tool for trying to generate examples of open pedagogy, because one of the things that David Wiley he threw down the challenge is we need more examples in order to have, even to start the conversation really about open pedagogy and what it is. So it's kind of exciting. It feels like we're really at the ground level of this, and there's room for us to work together to sort of help shape and define some of, what might be, sorry to use the term, best practices around open pedagogy. So hopefully by the end, you will have a sense of a definition and some ideas about examples of open pedagogy. We're also going to invite you to join our open Google Doc as we're collecting examples. There's some that exist in the world that are being used, which is really exciting, and we can follow those. And then there's some that are just conceptual. You may all of a sudden have a great idea for one, as you're kind of going through this session. So we'd like to gather them all up because I think we're looking for 15 to 20 is what David Wiley said we need. So we're pretty close, but definitely we need some creative thinking about this.
Great. Thank you. So hopefully you'll be able to hear me all right as we continue here. So the first definition that we want to talk about is, what is the term open? And I'm sure you're sort of further going to be exploring this in your course, but we're going to go ahead and use the Hewlett Foundation's definition, which is OER are teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. So the key terms there are free use and repurposing by others. And so one of the attributes that's used across the open education world to define what open is, and this was further defined by David Wiley as the 5 R's. They are retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. So I just want to go over these a little bit. So the idea is, for something to be open, it must include these 5 R's. So we retain, we have the right to make, own, and control copies of the content. We can reuse the material, so we have the right to use the content in a wide range of ways. We can revise that, so this means that we have the right to adapt, adjust, or modify the content itself. We can remix it, so we can combine original or revised content with other open content to create something new. And we can also redistribute the material. So you have the right to share copies of the original content, your revisions, or your remixes with others. So these 5 R's are quite important as we continue the discussion about open and what open pedagogy is in particular. Any questions or comments about this initial term of open?
I'll just jump in. I feel like this definition is fairly well adopted and really serves our notion of resources. And I agree with you, Amanda, that it helps us to understand it in terms of practices, but I'm starting to hear more people talking about open educational practices as a broader term that includes resources, but also activities and other practices, even research practices. Yeah, thank you. So here's my umbrella term. So we had a conference, Open Textbook Summit last week in Vancouver, and we had a great keynote who talked about these 2 cycles that are, really the foundation of our work in higher ed, teaching and research. So both of these cycles can be made more open. So just quickly running through the research cycle, you can pre-register your hypothesis. You can use open data or make your data open. You can use an open statistical software package to analyze your data. You can participate in an open peer review process, and you can publish your work openly. You don't have to do all of those things. You could choose one of those things and start, being more open with your practice. Similarly, with open teaching practices, you can develop your course in the open. One of our colleagues, Paul Hibbets, does his course design work in the open, inviting input from potential future students as to what the course scope is going to be and what they would like to learn. It seems incredibly brave, but he's doing it and seems to be having success with it. You can choose to adopt open materials, open textbooks, other open educational resources. You can have your students participate in open assignments, working in the wild web, as opposed to behind an LMS, login. And maybe evaluation processes could be open, beyond Rate My Professor, maybe something other than that. But it's interesting to think about opening up our educational practices. And today what we're really talking about specifically is this one piece. You can do one without the others, again, right? And this is part of what Wiley is talking about. He's arguing that, it's great to adopt an open resource, but it's kind of not taking the full advantage of the affordances of the internet. And so to really make your courses more open learning experiences, we need to start talking about open pedagogy or open learning design, open assignments. It's not enough just to do the textbook. And this was a tweet that our executive director posted at the Open Textbook Summit that's been something on my mind as well. And, you know, the librarians have really joined the open textbook movement. And we would like to invite our instructional design and learning design and educational developer colleagues to join. And we're hoping that the invitation around learning design is going to be a compelling invitation for them to bring their creative energy to designing sort of these assignments and learning activities that will work with the open textbook that has been quite successful so far. So I feel like I've just talked a whole lot. Does anybody have any questions about this umbrella term and how it fits, or seems good? Can I get a check mark if you're okay and we can go on? Thanks, Michelle. Okay. This is also a way of checking that you're paying attention.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Okay, great. No, that's a really good way to frame it in terms of the umbrella and then having the two separate, not necessarily separate entities, but dividing it that way. I like that umbrella definition you put together there. So one of the things is we just talked about what is open, and obviously the next word in our title is pedagogy. So we just have two definitions here. One is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the other one is from Wikipedia. And so you can see how both of these definitions are interpreting the term pedagogy. So for our purposes, pedagogy really refers to learning design. So it's the creative work done by faculty and educational developers and others involved in education. And it's critical because it leads to the practical application of pedagogy in course design and a student's learning experiences. So I won't go into much more detail on that, but that's really, you know, we're sort of creating the framework for where that's coming from. So then if you bring in the two words, we now have open pedagogy. So David Wiley has said that open pedagogy includes teaching and learning practices that are possible when you adopt OER, but would be impossible when you adopt traditionally copyrighted materials. And so we really are at a point in this conversation where there isn't a clear definition that exists, like there is for pedagogy and open. And so this is really the challenge and the opportunity we have, and it's to be a part of creating that definition. And I think it also has us questioning and sort of, like we said, continuing that conversation, and I think that's what's the important part about this. The other thing about the term open pedagogy that's important to talk about is that it uses OER, and students work in the open and they create and share their work in the open. And so again, this is something, you know, we can talk about as we get into some more examples, but as Tracy mentioned previously, when you start looking at putting your work out into the open, there is a sense of vulnerability that you throw out there. And so that's something that, you know, you can think about as you start asking your students to be a part of that. And what does that mean? Oftentimes it means an increase in quality because students are aware that their work is going out to a wider audience. And other times you also have the case where students opt out of the assignment. However, what we're asking today, and for you to really be a part of the challenge that David Wiley put out. And so the question here is, he's saying, can we come up with 15 to 20 more examples before we can have an actual substantive conversation about open pedagogy? So I see here that Cindy Underhill has a question. So if you use a copyrighted resource, can you still have open pedagogy? So the thing is if we look back here, it's really so this is a, yeah, I was just going to say, Tracy, it is a great question because this is the question that we often sort of grapple with is, with open pedagogy, do you have to use all 5 of the R's, or can you sort of mix the 5 R's? So you can have some and you can have others. Now, if you use a copyrighted resource, I think you can't, there's nothing you can do with that, right? So it depends how you frame the activity. So you can't reuse or repurpose that particular copyright resource, but I think you can use it as a supplemental resource, I guess you could say. Does that make sense? Tracy, do you want to add to that?
Sure, yeah, I'll take a stab. I think the answer is yes. I think you can use a copyrighted resource and still have an example of open pedagogy. I've become, as this conversation has been happening, I've become a little bit uncomfortable with the use of the word pedagogy, actually. I think it sort of triggers some people because they feel that it refers to young people learning only, and maybe we should use andragogy. So I like to broaden it out with learning design, with the term learning design instead of pedagogy. But for this, particularly this webinar that we're talking about, we are really talking about activity design. So I think you could use a closed resource and an open activity. So one example might be you've maybe heard of the activity where students are assigned the task of taking a Wikipedia entry and writing and rewriting it, improving it so that it gets that designated, preferred status in Wikipedia. I can't remember what the word is called. So that could totally be I think, an example of open pedagogy or open assignment that uses closed textbooks or whatever in the course because they're working in the open. Maybe it is open learning rather than open pedagogy. See, you're on the ground floor. We have to sort of tease these things
That's
out.
right.
Thanks for that question.
That's one thing I think, it's interesting because we've done this presentation a couple of other times, and in a way it also brings out a lot of our own vulnerabilities in the presentation because, it's not one of these presentations where you have all the answers or exactly how, I guess what I'm trying to say is the conversation continues to grow, and it's this sort of, do we call it open learning? Do we call it open pedagogy? How do we ensure that we're following along the lines of openness if we're using resources that do have a copyright license on them, etc. So it's an interesting question for sure. Okay, so just lastly, this was also on your course site, and I really like this thought of it is, at its core, the question of open pedagogy is what can I do in the context of open that I couldn't do before? And I think that's a really important question. So how do we as educators best engage our students in deeper learning, and how can we do that, and how is that more empowering through the use of open materials? Sherry, I'm just reading this question here. I was meaning copyrighted materials that were not licensed. That's right. So that's what I thought you meant too, sort of using a material that was a copyrighted article or a copyrighted book that doesn't have a CC license. So I think what Tracy was saying is you could still create an open activity around that material item. It's just you're limiting other people being able to reuse or reinterpret that material, I guess you could say. Right. Okay, so after sort of chewing, yeah, that is what I meant. After chewing these ideas around a little bit and trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like if we're talking about open pedagogy, open learning, open activities? We sort of stumbled into trying to organize our thinking with this matrix. So version 1 actually I think our language is getting better. So across the top we've got, open versus not, and when we say open, we're being broad in that term. So not just an open resource, but open educational practices broadly. And then learning-centered design versus teaching-centered design. So in other words, we're not trying to think of just examples of open approaches to learning, but also like great ones, like ones that are really good
assignments that students love and that lead to exceptional learning. So this is kind of the bones of our matrix, and I'll build a little bit as we go. So so if we plop in sort of the definitions, these are the definitions that Wiley's used that Amanda was talking about. If we look at open, it's this business about stuff that's possible when you adopt open that is not possible when you don't. And not open would be maybe what we think of traditional, so closed resources, closed LMS communities, things that you can't get to unless you have the password or you've paid the money or whatever. And then down the other side, learning-centered design. When we started talking about this, we said effective, which seemed a bit loaded and judgy. We don't want to alienate our colleagues from the conversation, but just trying to get at this business of being authentic and flexible, and the students have choice, and they're working sort of in a reflective, real-world way, and maybe they have, did I say choice? Choice. And then again with teaching-centered design, again sort of what we might think of as quote-unquote traditional. So lectures, what Wiley and others have sort of referred to as disposable assignments, ones that everybody kind of does the same one or variation, only the teacher reads it and then it goes in the recycle bin after. Exam focus, people doing the same thing, or instructor making decisions. So those we thought were like the factors that might lead us there. If we could think about examples of these things, or focus on a quadrant and try to come up with one that meets. So if we take, an open plus, anyway, sorry, I'm ahead and behind of myself here. So if we use this matrix as a tool for brainstorming, think about a course or an activity that you know of and try to place it somewhere in the matrix, or focus on a box and try to come up with an activity. So if you have an activity or a course that makes use of open educational resources but is otherwise closed because of the design of the course or activity, this would go in this number 2, right? So maybe not living up to its full potential of open. So traditional courses, ones that have traditional textbooks, lots of lectures, lots of exams, only the teacher sees the student work, they would go into quadrant 4. This quadrant here, a not open but learning centered, this might be filled with all of your favorite examples from your time at school. Great learning activities that you really enjoyed and got a lot out of, that were conducted in a closed space of the classroom or an LMS and with closed resources. So what we're trying to do, of course, is fill up quadrant 1. And hopefully this matrix might help us sort of get there. So here are a few examples that we are aware of. For the one that we're after, number 1, this is the one that I just referred to a minute ago, the murder, madness, and mayhem. So the idea is that students edit a Wikipedia entry to the point that it becomes a featured article. So here are students, doing something that is real world. They choose, what they're going to go after, and they're also doing it out in the wild, right? It's open and it's hopefully learning centered. An example of an open teacher-centered activity might be an open book multiple choice final exam in a course that uses an open textbook. And this is the kind of thing that Wiley would suggest is underutilizing the potential of open. So I'm going to offer you our Google Doc that we are gathering examples, and invite you to add any that you come up with to it. I just want to make sure you get it. Because I think Wiley's point that we really do need to come up with more examples, particularly that would fall into quadrant 1 before we can really try to understand what this thing is really well taken and is our sort of next task as the conversation unfolds. So there's a link to the Google Doc that we have set up for this. There are some other examples in there. And we are hoping to generate a few more that we, haven't heard of yet. I think we might be up to around 18. We're hoping for 20. I see some people are heading in there. Oh yeah, no, we're at 16 and we're hoping for 20. So there's a challenge. We need 4 more. Does anyone want to jump in, either grab the mic or in the chat room, and just comment on this matrix? Does it seem like does it work for you? Does it inspire any sort of thinking? Does it seem somehow not helpful? Just looking for feedback on the matrix itself or any of the activities.
I made it back. Somehow my audio got screwed up, but I see some people are typing there.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, so any feedback on the matrix itself, can you tell us about an activity that either exists in the world or in your imagination that would fall into quadrant 1? Victoria commenting that much of what they do is in number 3, which is great, though I try not to even use judgy language at all. The intention of the matrix isn't to kind of evaluate necessarily. It's more about trying to generate new ones. Oh, that's interesting. Open has more experimentation and risk built in, and not open has more management. That's interesting. We also have talked about a continuum, rather than a quadrant like this. So maybe that requires us, we'd have to collapse a couple of the categories or do something else with it. But maybe, yeah, as a way to plot these things. Yeah, porous boundaries for sure. Can anyone think of an activity that they would slot in or near quadrant 1? E-portfolios, yeah. I guess that's all in how you use them, like always, right? But certainly, I have worked with faculty on courses where they and the students got exactly open e-portfolios, got very excited about having their work out in the world. It seems like there's still concerns about privacy and whatnot, but it seems like the world is changing at the same time too, and working out in the open can be good for a whole bunch of reasons. Any other examples that you can think of, or that you could point us to, or add to our Google Doc as we're continuing to collect? Maybe this could be an activity that you guys take on. That's a great example. So open source, open data, and open repository for assignments.
That's a great one.
So,
listed below there from Mike Little, who says he's been involved in mentoring students learning to code. Yeah.
Mike, did you have any difficulty with privacy concerns from the students, or was it a non-issue? That's great. That's great. So question, would an activity that has students use a collaborative tool that use a freemium model be considered open? I think so. Certainly open, and then we'd have to figure out, if it's learning centered or teaching centered. But if it's in the wild web, I think it's open. That's my opinion anyway. And then a good question from the UBC crew, how do you find students approach the risk aspect of working in the open? That question was for Mike. And a resource there, Stack Exchange. Oh, there's lots happening in the chat. So in your assignment, Mike, was they were working in open teams? These are great examples. If you don't add them to the Google Doc, I certainly will. This is fantastic, and it's just what is for us happening right now is this very exciting and emergent process of thinking about this with colleagues and getting new ideas every time. That's so fantastic.
And I think too, it just helps. It's not only, as you said, Tracy, just for us to share with our colleagues, but it also helps you as educators determine how best you want to try to use your own open pedagogical examples or use those of others and really get some insight into how to frame those assessments or activities within your own course.
So I don't want to sort of quell the enthusiasm and the generosity of your examples, but we are pretty much at the end of our slide deck, as it were. What's next for us with this is to continue as we are. We have been presenting on this topic at local open events. We take any opportunity such as today to talk to other colleagues online where we can. And I think, that tweet about where are the instructional designers and educational developers, I think that is going to be a focus for us going forward, is engaging those folks specifically because they already have the expertise about learning design and try to get some, great ideas. Yeah, bring the ideas. Yeah, we will be doing this live at ETUG this week if you're in the SFU area, or next week, or no, this week. Yeah, not checking for IDs. But I'll let me finish, and thank you for coming and your generous questions and examples. We will add them to our list. Yeah, Amanda, do you want to have any final words?
No, I think that's great. I really appreciate the attendance and for everyone participating. We will, like we said, presenting face-to-face this week, this Thursday at ETUG SFU Burnaby. So come on down. We're excited.
Well, thank you both very much. And this is kind of the kickoff for TWP, so we'll be posting the anonymized transcripts unless everyone's okay with having them open, as well as the transcripts from the or sorry, the recording from the session. So thanks very much, everybody.